The Edo period was the most peaceful era in Japanese history up to that point. As the monetary economy developed, the common people became wealthier, and their culture began to flourish. At the same time, increased economic activity brought about experiences with inflation and deflation, making effective economic policy a key issue. Due to Japan's isolationist policy, there was limited inflow of Western science and technology, which led to Japan falling behind in technological development, though new academic fields did begin to emerge. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the first shogun. In 1603, 3 years after the Battle of Sekigahara, Tokugawa Ieyasu was appointed shogun by Emperor Go-Yozei and established the Edo shogunate. Just 2 years later, in 1605, he passed the title on to his third son, Hidetada, while still retaining real power behind the scenes. Ieyasu strengthened the shogunate's control by establishing key laws like the one castle per domain rule and the bukushohato, the laws for the military houses, which regulated the daimyos. Although lords continued to govern their territories, especially those not deemed politically or economically critical, according to their own local laws, they were ultimately under the strict authority of the Edo shogunate. Interestingly, these territories later came to be called Han during the Meiji era, but at the time they were simply referred to as kuni, countries, which is why even today the word kuni can mean hometown or region in Japanese. Meanwhile, in the wider world, England and the Netherlands were beginning their global expansions after Spain and Portugal. In 1600, a Dutch ship called the Liefde was shipwrecked in the Pacific and drifted ashore in Bungo Province. Two survivors, an Englishman named William Adams and a Dutchman named John Justin, were brought to Edo and met with Ieyasu. They ended up serving as informal diplomatic advisors, offering valuable insights, especially concerning the covert activities of Spain and Portugal. Trade began to grow, but as Christianity spread rapidly within Japan, Ieyasu viewed it as a threat to national security and issued a ban on the religion in 1612. He also imposed laws on the imperial court, the Kinchu Narabini Kugi Shohato, putting the nobility under his control, and similar regulations were set for temples and shrines. In 1614, Ieyasu declared war on the Toyotomi clan, whom he saw as a threat to the Tokugawa regime. After a second campaign in 1615, the Toyotomi family was finally destroyed. Ieyasu died the following year in 1616 due to illness. Tokugawa Hidetada, the second shogun. After Ieyasu's death, Hidetada strictly enforced the Buki Shohato and the court regulations, which led to many daimyos being stripped of their titles, and a sharp increase in masterless samurai, ronin. In 1622, he ordered the execution of 55 Christians, including priests and monks, who had been arrested under the anti-Christian laws. This event became one of the largest mass executions of Christians in Japanese history. Hidetada continued to push forward policies in a forceful and uncompromising manner. Tokugawa Iemitsu, the third shogun. In 1623, Hidetada passed the title of shogun to his son Iemitsu, but retained real power until his death in 1632. Iemitsu launched a number of major reforms, including the establishment of the Sankin Kotai, alternate attendance, system in 1635. This required all daimyos to live in Edo every other year, while their wives and heirs had to remain there permanently. Traveling between Edo and their domains involved huge processions known as daimyo gyoretsu, which placed heavy financial burdens on their domains. However, these processions also stimulated the economy by promoting the development of roads, bridges, lodging, and restaurants, benefiting common people and encouraging interaction between Edo and the provinces. Crossing in front of these processions was seen as a serious insult, and in some cases could result in immediate execution. In practice, though, the procession was preceded by flag bearers who warned people ahead of time, so such incidents were rare. Couriers and midwives were allowed to cross as long as they didn't disrupt the formation. The Tokugawa regime established a strict class system with samurai at the top. Samurai were the only ones allowed to carry swords and use surnames. However, this hierarchy wasn't completely rigid. People from other classes could become samurai through adoption. Iemitsu's most significant policy was national seclusion, sakoku. Restrictions on foreign trade had already begun under Hidetada. But in 1635, Iemitsu went a step further by banning overseas travel for Japanese citizens and forbidding those abroad from returning. In 1639, after the Shimabara Rebellion, full-scale isolation began. The Shimabara Rebellion was a large-scale uprising by peasants and ronin in Kyushu. Many of the peasants involved were Christians, but the main causes were harsh taxes and brutal punishments for refusing to pay or convert. Afterward, trade was restricted to 4 gateways: Matsumai Han for Ezo, now Hokkaido; Satsuma Han for Ryukyu, now Okinawa; Tsushima Han for Korea; Nagasaki under direct control of the shogunate for Dutch and Chinese trade. The Ryukyu kingdom was inhabited by people with Jomon ancestry, like mainland Japanese, and maintained diplomatic relations with both Japan and Ming China. The Ainu people of Izo were found to be a genetic mix of Jomon and Okhotsk peoples. The first 3 generations of the Tokugawa shogunate built their foundation on overwhelming military and economic power. Strict control kept daimyos and samurai from rebelling. That same military strength, left over from the Sengoku period, likely helped Japan maintain its independence during the age of European colonial expansion. One of the most significant projects carried out over the course of 3 generations, beginning with Ieyasu, was the development of a comprehensive water and sewage system. When Ieyasu first entered Edo in 1590, he prioritized securing clean drinking water and built purification facilities that made use of natural spring water. After he was appointed Sei Taishogun, full-scale urban development of Edo began, and by the time of the 3rd shogun, Iemitsu, a functioning sewer system was also in place to handle household wastewater and rain runoff. Tokugawa Ietsuna, the 4th shogun. In 1651, the 3rd shogun, Iemitsu, passed away and his eldest son, Ietsuna, became the 4th shogun at the young age of 10. Because he was still a child, government affairs were overseen primarily by his uncle, Hoshina Masayuki, and other senior officials. At this time, due to repeated dispossessions of daimyos during the first 3 shogunates, there was a large population of ronin, masterless samurai, across the country. Many of them gathered at a private academy founded by the military scholar Yui Shosetsu, who was eventually inspired by them to plot the overthrow of the shogunate. He saw the installation of a child shogun as a golden opportunity and attempted to carry out his plan once Ietsuna took power. However, the plot was betrayed from within and ultimately failed. Though the uprising was crushed, it had a significant impact on the shogunate. This event prompted a shift from rule by force to governance through culture and moral authority. In 1657, the Great Fire of Meiriki devastated much of Edo. The city was rebuilt with large-scale urban planning focused on fire prevention. The shogunate's finances suffered greatly from the relief payments made to Edo's townspeople who lost their homes, and as a result, Edo Castle's main tower was never rebuilt. Tokugawa Tsunayoshi, the 5th shogun. Ietsuna died before producing an heir due to poor health. In 1680, Tsunayoshi, his younger brother and the fourth son of Iemitsu, became the fifth shogun after being formally adopted as Ietsuna's successor. Upon succession, he issued a new version of the Buki Shohato. The original first clause, which emphasized martial training, was replaced with one that stressed loyalty and proper etiquette. Tsunayoshi was deeply devoted to Confucianism, which valued hierarchy and morality. He even built the Yushima Seido, a Confucian temple in Edo, which he also designated as a center for learning. Tsunayoshi is most famously known for Shorui Awaremi no Rei, the edicts on compassion for living beings. These laws made harming animals punishable by death or forced suicide. For example, killing a dog or a cat was a capital offense, fishing was punished with exile, and cutting down a tree with a bird's nest could result in punishment. Many people were punished under these edicts, and later generations often criticized them as examples of misrule. However, the laws also prohibited abandoning the sick or infants, and can be seen as an attempt to revive moral values that had been eroded by the long years of Sengoku. Tsunayoshi's reputation declined later in his reign due to repeated natural disasters, including famine, fires, earthquakes, and the eruption of Mount Fuji. At the time, disasters were often seen as signs of heaven's displeasure with a ruler. Japan was one of the world's leading producers of gold and silver up through the early Edo period. This wealth funded not only the development of Edo, but also road building and public works across the country. However, production eventually peaked, and expenses began to strain government finances. In response, a currency reform was carried out in 1695 that reduced the gold and silver content of coins. It caused an increase in the money supply and helped fuel a period of economic growth. With the economy booming, especially around Kyoto, a new cultural movement known as Genroku Culture began to flourish among wealthy townspeople. In the arts, puppet theater, Ningyo Joruri, and Yaro Kabuki, all-male kabuki, gained popularity. Painters like Ogata Koren became well-known, and luxury items such as Miyazaki Yuzin's dyed fabrics were in vogue. In literature, Matsubasho's haiku became highly sought after, and many aspired to become his disciples. Woodblock printing also spread rapidly, giving rise to bookstores and rental bookshops, showing how strong the general public's interest in reading had become. Another notable trend was a fascination with mathematics. Enthusiasts would write out math problems and their solutions on wooden tablets or ima and dedicate them to shrines. Remarkably, a theorem identical to the six-ball chain, later presented by British Nobel laureate Frederick Soddy in 1936, had already been offered to Samukawa Shrine in Kanagawa Prefecture, complete with the solution. Mathematician Seki Takakazu, aka Seki Kowa, established Wasan, a uniquely Japanese system of mathematics. At the time, martial arts training was still mandatory for samurai boys, but as Confucianism spread, Bushido, a moral and ethical code based on Confucian values, began to take shape. It's worth noting that Bushido was not a written legal code, but more of a widely shared cultural mindset rooted in Japan's unique traditions. Tokugawa Ienobu, the sixth shogun. Tokugawa Ietsugu, the seventh shogun. Since Tsunayoshi had no heir, he adopted his nephew Ienobu, who was 47 at the time, as his successor. Ienobu became shogun in 1709 at the age of 48. As soon as he took office, Ienobu abolished the edicts on compassion for living things and granted amnesty to many people who had been punished under those laws. However, he passed away just 3 years later. The next shogun, Ietsugu, took office at the tender age of 5, but he too died of illness only 3 years into his reign. During this time, a Confucian scholar named Arai Hakuseki, who had served as Ienobu's tutor, continued to oversee the administration. To curb the runaway inflation that had occurred during Tsunayoshi's reign, Hakuseki carried out a series of monetary reforms, such as reissuing coins with a restored gold content to help revive the economy. He also imposed restrictions on trade to prevent the further outflow of scarce gold and silver. However, the repeated changes to the currency created market confusion and ultimately led to deflation. Tokugawa Yoshimune, the eighth shogun. With Ienobu's death, the direct Tokugawa mainline came to an end. As a result, Yoshimune, from the key branch of the Tokugawa clan, was chosen as the eighth shogun. One of his first acts was to dismiss existing power holders like Arai Hakuseki, and he set about reforming the shogunate's finances by promoting frugality and austerity. He also encouraged the development of new rice fields, which led to increased rice production. To listen to the voices of the common people, he installed measubako, suggestion boxes, through which citizens could submit their opinions. Taking these suggestions into account, he established a civilian firefighting force in response to the frequent fires that plagued Edo, and also set up welfare facilities to aid the poor. He promoted practical learning and relaxed restrictions on the import of Western books, allowing those unrelated to Christianity into the country. This ushered in new knowledge in fields like astronomy and medicine. While his emphasis on frugality temporarily suppressed economic activity, trade restrictions led to the growth of domestic production of goods like cotton, raw silk, and textiles. The Yoku, the shogun's inner palace where his wife, children, and concubines lived, was a symbol of extravagance. To cut back on expenses, Yoshimune laid off a large number of female attendants. Interestingly, those selected for dismissal were often the more beautiful women, under the belief that their looks would help them manage life outside the palace. However, in order to balance the budget, his strict austerity measures prohibited luxury even for the general populace, which further contributed to deflation. In 1736, the government issued new coins with reduced gold content once again, and finally the Edo economy began to recover. Tokugawa Ieshige, the ninth shogun. Tokugawa Ieharu, 10th shogun. Ieshige, the ninth shogun, had a speech impediment that made his words difficult to understand. Only his close advisor, Oka Tadamitsu, could comprehend him clearly, which earned Tadamitsu the shogun's trust. Oka's junior, Tanuma Okitsugu, later entered the shogun's service. Even after Ieharu became the 10th shogun, Tanuma remained in power as a senior advisor, eventually becoming Roju senior counselor in 1772. Ieharu, who was passionate about shogi, Japanese chess, largely left political matters to his retainers, and so most policies were driven by Tanuma's initiatives. He shifted the economic focus away from rice-based feudalism toward a more mercantilist economy. He also expanded efforts to develop Izo and eased trade restrictions. One of his reforms involved issuing new silver coins that, unlike previous ones valued by weight, were given a set face value, an early step toward modern coinage. However, conservative shogunate officials opposed Tanuma's policies. A series of disasters, including great fires and the massive eruption of Mount Asama, triggered the largest famine of the Edo period. Public discontent was directed at Tanuma, and after Ieharu's death, he was forced out of office. Tokugawa Ienari, the 11th shogun. Following Ieharu's death, there was a prolonged political vacuum during which no new shogun was appointed. This period of uncertainty led to widespread social unrest and soaring prices, culminating in a wave of riots across the country. For several days, Edo fell into a state of chaos. Eventually, Tokugawa Ienari, the adopted son of Ieharu, was named the 11th shogun. During a time of severe famine, he appointed Matsudaira Sadanobu, lord of Shirakawa Han and grandson of Yoshimune, as Roju. Ienari remained in office for 50 years, the longest tenure of any shogun, but he mostly left political affairs to his retainers while spending much of his time in the Oku. Sadanobu followed in the footsteps of his grandfather Yoshimune and promoted austerity and frugality, moving in the opposite direction of Tanuma Okitsugu's policies. However, Sadanobu was an idealist. He imposed strict frugality not only on government officials, but also on the imperial court, feudal lords, farmers, and townspeople. Eventually, he even implemented ideological controls, banning all schools of thought other than Jushi's Neo-Confucianism. Sadanobu's excessive control triggered widespread resistance and heightened tensions with Ienari, ultimately leading to his dismissal in 1793. After Sadanobu's departure, Ienari resumed his extravagant lifestyle. Society gradually regained its vitality, and a new cultural movement known as the Kasei Culture flourished. Unlike the earlier Genroku culture centered around Kyoto and Osaka, the Kasei culture was driven by the commoners of Edo, marking a shift in the country's cultural epicenter. In literature, humorous fiction gained popularity, while popular kabuki theater attracted mass audiences. In painting, renowned works by artists like Katsushika Hokusai and Utagawa Hiroshige were created. In academia, privately funded schools called shijuku were established by scholars, mainly catering to the upper classes and producing many talented individuals. For the general public, Terakoya, temple schools, offered basic education, contributing to a literacy rate of over 70%. Among popular pastimes, plant cultivation became fashionable. Ordinary townsfolk enjoyed growing and even breeding their own varieties of morning glories. Travel also became popular, spurred on by travel literature and artwork that featured regional landscapes and specialties. People in Edo began to dream of far-off provinces, and pilgrimages to Ise became especially popular. In a humorous twist, some elderly or infirm owners sent their pet dogs on pilgrimages in their place. Along the journey, strangers would give the dogs food and water, and some even placed coins in pouches tied around their necks. With the help of many kind people around, the dog safely completed the pilgrimage and returned to its owner. Although life in Japan seemed peaceful and secure during this time, the country was already standing on the edge of a cliff. From around 1790 onward, foreign ships increasingly began to appear off Japan's coasts, and the shogunate found itself scrambling to respond. In the next episode of Edo Period Part 2, we'll explore how Japan got dragged into the international spotlight.